welcome to AFSC's annual Zev Jabotinsky Memorial. We're here to commemorate the life and legacy of Zev Jabotinsky and remember his message of an iron wall in the Middle East. Jabotinsky introduced the idea of an iron wall as the best way to keep a Jewish state safe. An iron wall with invincible borders. Jabotinsky envisioned the IDF. Let me tell you something that may have a few of you on the edge of your seat. At this moment, Israel's security is more closely watched than ever. We are listening and watching as the situation unfolds in the south, but we know that Israel is strong. Israel's been ranked the 8th most powerful country in the world. 70 years old, and look how far it's come. It's miraculous. Only the strong survive in the Middle East. Strong in determination and ingenuity, strong in military, the Iron Wall, and strong in identity. We have the nation state of the Jewish people. Israel is strong, and it's just to its people, something you don't often find in that region. AFSC is actively involved in supporting Israel and its people so that it may continue to thrive. Let me give you a few examples. Firstly, we partner with and give support to many organizations. We'd be here all night if I started listing them, but this year alone, we've supported over 30 organizations. Ask anyone who's traveled with us, many of them seated right in front of us, and they would tell you that our support can be felt throughout Israel. Some specific examples. After the murder of Rabbi Raziel Shavach outside Chavat Gilad, a community in the Shomron where many of our friends reside, through one of our partner organizations, we donated a security camera. 2 weeks later, that camera helped catch a terrorist who tried to ram his car into a local resident. And most recently, when our friends in Yitzhar told us that they were afraid that their fields would be burnt by terror arsonists, AFSC came to their rescue. We raised money to create a firewall. And just 2 weeks ago, a fire was set towards their wheat fields. Their homes and their fields were saved by that firewall. We know and we love these people because we meet with them and bond with them during our semi-annual Chuzuk missions to Israel. So this is the Israel story that a lot of people don't know. And this is the story that we want everyone to know, especially young Jews. And we're embarking on a new venture. We want to develop these bonds and understanding in American youth. So we are announcing officially tonight our new youth program in Israel. If not us, will bring thousands of students learning in gap year programs and semesters abroad on free day trips to Judea, Samaria, the Jordan Valley, and areas currently experiencing conflict. Not too close to the conflict, but anyway. Our director, Rabbi Uri Pilichowski, will help students learn and understand the importance of a whole Israel from a historical, geographical, and legal perspective. Helen and I are thrilled that we'll be in Israel to take part in the premiere of this program on August 22nd, together with students from Hebrew University. if not us students, will return with the desire and the competence to spread the truth to their families and friends and to stand up for Israel. Additionally, AFSI plans to provide advanced training to hand-picked youth who show real leadership potential. These additional seminars will help to develop them into strong young advocates as part of Am Yisrael on college campuses and beyond. Perhaps one of them will even be here to speak to us next year. History is what makes Israel different from other nations, and identity is the battle that Israel currently faces in the United States. We are doing our utmost to fight that battle. Join AFSI on our upcoming missions to Israel and see firsthand why Judea and Samaria are crucial for a strong and defensible Israel. The deep relationships we build on our missions allow us to receive firsthand information from the 11th happiest country in the world. Hard to believe, but don't take my word for it. The UN study agrees that Israeli citizens are happy. Zev Jabotinsky believed in the Jewish people's biblical, historical, and legal entitlement to the land of Israel. AFSI was founded on and continues to adhere to those beliefs. With your help, together, we will continue to fight for a whole Israel by maintaining Jabotinsky's iron wall. Israel, a small, young state, is a shining example of a nation that didn't just survive, but has thrived and strived to heights that were unimaginable by the survivors of the Holocaust and Jews elsewhere, just 70 years ago. Israel has the oldest and richest historical impact on the world today. Let's make sure that Israel continues to spread light onto the world and create the unimaginable. Israel is their story. Israel is our story. And Israel is your story. And we cannot let Israel's enemies destroy it. Not ever. And now, it's a great honor to introduce our Ron Edelstein, a former Betari who greatly admires the prescience of Jabotinsky and his revisionist Zionist philosophy that required the founding of a Jewish state. Together with his family, Ron has made considerable contributions towards the betterment of life in Israel and to its safety. For that, among other things, we admire him, and we're honored to have him with us this evening.
Continued survival of Israel would not have become a reality if it were not for the dedication of Jabotinsky and his allies. I guess this is the best place for me to acknowledge my parents, Florence and Michael Edelstein. May they have length of days. Amen. For if it were not for them, I would not be standing before you tonight. I thank Hashem each and every day that I was blessed to be their son and sibling to my brother and sister. I can tell you most assuredly that if I had not been my parents' son, there is a tremendous possibility that I would never even have heard of the name Zev Jabotinsky of blessed memory, let alone come to belong to the Betar Zionist youth movement and to dedicate my life to helping varied Jewish causes. If the truth be told, had I not been my parents' son, I would not even have a strong Jewish identity. My parents are an integral part to my personal narrative because of who they are and where they came from. My parents lived through the nightmarish years of the Holocaust. They witnessed the most heinous forms of brutality and sadism at the hands of the Nazi beasts. The kind of unspeakable atrocities that were brought upon them are beyond mind-numbing in every sense of the word. As I was coming of age in the 70s, I grew up in the shadow of the Holocaust in a working-class neighborhood in Brooklyn, where I and many of my friends listened intently to the stories of our parents and grandparents that they told us. It was 1972, and rather than hanging out on the gritty streets of Brooklyn, my parents sent me and my siblings to Camp Betar in Neversink, New York. It was there that my love for my people and Israel was strengthened enormously. While other Jewish camps may have taught their Jewish charges about Jewish tradition, Camp Betar was not just another Jewish camp. It was a Zionist Jewish camp with a capital Z. Not only did I have the opportunity to learn about Jabotinsky, the true personification of a Renaissance man and his lifelong achievements, but I lived the experience waking up in the morning in Camp Betar, saw us engage in strength, training, and self-defense. As the day progressed, our madrichim, our counselors, taught us history lessons that are forever etched in my mind. We learned about the Zionist movement and the infamous Kishinev pogroms, which indeed ignited Jabotinsky's activism. The formation of the Zion Mule, which Jabotinsky also took part, as well as the Jewish Legion, the First World Zionist Congress, and the founding of the revisionist movement and the birth of Brit Trumpeldor movement in Riga, Latvia in 1923. We learned of the brave men and women of the Irgun and Lehi who put their lives on the line to fight for the freedom of our people. On the walls of the camp dining room, we gazed at the pictures of our heroes, but they were not pop stars, athletes, entertainers. The images of Yosef Trumpeldor, Dov Gruna, David Raziel, Shlomo Ben Yosef, and Menachem Begin were our mentors. Each morning we stood at Mizdar, the formation, as the flag of Israel was raised. Shivers ran down our collective spine with the keen understanding that we lived in an era of miracles as witnessed in the birth of the modern state of Israel. Above all, we knew we had a unique and special destiny as Jews. We were the people that stood at Sinai and heard the voice of the one and only God. It was we, the Jewish people, who were the few against the many and the mighty, yet through Hashem's constant mercy, and our ability to summon up the moral strength to fight for our survival in each generation, we remain the indestructible Jews. And so it was, for the first time, I held a gun in my life. It was at shooting practice at Camp Betar. I was never quite sure whether I would use a gun in self-defense or to defend my people. But the one thing I did know is that the Jew had better be ready to gird their loins and take up arms if they should arise. As many of you remember, the 70s were a turbulent era for the Jews, and the putrid stench of centuries-old anti-Semitism waft in the air. Jews in the Soviet Union were denied the right to immigrate to Israel. The Arab world launched a horrid campaign to defame Israel in the aftermath of their defeat in the 1967 war. Israel became an aggressive occupier in the eyes of the haters, and these mendacious claims were affirmed at that reprehensible cesspool on the east side known as the United Nations. Boo. Boo. It was 1975. 1975. The UN infamously passed a resolution declaring that Zionism was racism. My thoughts immediately rushed back to that which I had learned about Jabotinsky and the role of a Betari. Ki sheket hu refesh, said Jabotinsky. In Shir Betar, silence is filth. We can no longer remain silent. Speaking out for our people and for its existential survival of Israel came second nature to us in Betar. Demonstration after demonstration, rally after rally, sit-in after sit-in, we remembered the words of Jabotinsky that defined our mission. Ivri gam benoi ben sar, im eved im halech ben sartar ben mela. Even in poverty, the Jewish is a prince, crowned in the diadem of David. In light or in darkness, remember the crown of pride and tagar. Whether it came to audaciously confronting neo-Nazis in the streets of Skokie, Illinois, or taking on the monolith of Soviet communism, or fighting to defend a synagogue or a yeshiva, the Betari was there, unflinching, proud, and brave. Thank you, Rosh Betar. Thank you, Zev Jabotinsky, our stoic leader, for imbuing us with this unique ability to sacrifice for our people. Jabotinsky's words not only elevated us, but they served as the sole impetus which inspired us to receive the highest goals, to never back down, to relentlessly pursue genuine justice for our people. Whether it be the Betarim of yesteryear, who risked life and limb as resistance fighters against the Nazis during World War II, or be it the Betarim who joined the Irgun and Tzvi Leumi or Lehi, who valiantly fought the occupying Brits and defended the Jews from Arab murderers. They too were inspired by Jabotinsky. Above all, he loved his Betarim. To him, they were like his children. He proudly received them in their tilbolshets, their Betar uniforms, at the old site of Camp Betar in Hunter, New York, and in the cities and towns of Europe. Jabotinsky's legacy is that of a brilliant orator, journalist, statesman, and intrepid leader of his people, but his lasting legacy is one of a remarkable prescience. As the winds of war stirred in Europe, he traveled to cities, to towns, to hamlets, warning Jews to leave the diaspora. He warned everyone. Before the diaspora, he said, leave the diaspora before the diaspora vanquishes you. He knew that a revolutionary spirit must be imparted to the Jew, a spirit that would carry him through the darkest days of all humankind. As most of you have, at least on occasion, I have often thought about what Jabotinsky would say if he lived in contemporary times. Today, we're witnesses to a horrific upsurge of the most egregious forms of anti-Semitism. There is not a day that passes that we don't hear about Europe exploding in visceral Jew hatred. Jews murdered in France, Jews murdered in Germany, Jews murdered in the UK, any European country you can think of. But let's speak the truth. Here and now, the truth is that Europe can now aptly be called Eurabia, as the massive influx of Muslims and their bellicose belief has shattered any remaining vestiges of the Europe of yesteryear. Synagogues, yeshivot, and community centers have been targeted, and armed guards are an ever-present sight. Not only would Jabotinsky launch an emergency Aliyah campaign, but I truly believe that he was a realist by nature and knew that many Jews would be reluctant to leave their countries of origin. I think Jabotinsky, if Jabotinsky were alive today, he would make it his mission to teach Jews to defend themselves. He would attempt to stem the tide of assimilation amongst Jews, which has morphed into a spiritual Holocaust, the likes of which have never been seen. I believe Jabotinsky would battle the hellacious propaganda of the political left, both in the Western world and in Israel, and would take on the insidious BDS movement. Psst. I think Jabotinsky would do exactly what Helen and the wonderful people at AFSV do all the time. I believe that he too would raise his voice in constant opposition to a suicidal two-state solution, suicidal, and would expend his resources and innate talent to support the settlement movement in Judah and Shomron, in Judea and Samaria. Support the settlement movement. No territorial concessions, none, now or ever. I think Jabotinsky would exhort the government of Israel to never pander to the destructive voices of the Peace Now movement. The work of George Soros-sponsored NGOs who influenced the Israeli court system and have been instrumental in having settlements dismantled by government forces. No speech in these times would be complete without acknowledging our president, Donald J. Trump. I truly believe that if Jabotinsky were alive, he too would be invited. I didn't know that this speaker wasn't working all the time. He too would be invited to the Oval Office for a round of discussions with our president, because Trump, despite what the fake news media spews forth, is also a prescient leader and can easily recognize greatness. Did any of us ever believe that any U.S. president would have the courage to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem? Did any of us ever believe that a U.S. president would consistently stand up for Israel in the UN simply because Israel represents truth and righteousness in the Middle East? Who would have believed that 4 years ago when Obama was in office? Did anyone in this room ever believe 4 years ago that a president would be elected who did not harbor a palatable animus towards Israel? Who would have believed that? I certainly didn't. If we look back on very recent history, we see that all commanders-in-chief wanted to pressure Israel into an agreement that would spell their demise. But we're not going to do that, and we're not going to let that happen, are we? Yet and still, the Jew is a vigilant character and knows that the political maelstroms that were immersed in ebb and flow at any given moment, the predicament that we face can change in an instant. I ask all of you here today, clearly, you are people who care deeply about their brothers, about our brothers and sisters, and the state of Israel. People who have devoted their time to supporting Israel, to pay tribute to the great Jabotinsky, and all that he emulated by speaking out for your people at every turn. Please, everybody, let's do it. Today, the Democratic Party has taken a sharp and dangerous turn to the left, and its ranks are replete with Israel bashers and all stripes. Today, the purported resistance who work in contact with the fake news have attempted to distort our reality. Our younger generations, as Judy is now working on, our younger generations, our millennials, are buying into the narrative of lies and gross distortions. Just as Jabotinsky did, it is incumbent on all of us, on me and on all of you in this room, to speak the truth to power, the vanquish the discord that the youth find themselves in, and to help lead yet another generation to tear glorious heritage. And let's do it with the words of Jabotinsky reverberating in our hearts and in our minds. Thank you very much.
AFSI, of course, is the organization that was built on the premise of the Jabotinsky Iron Wall, the strength that Jabotinsky portrayed. And you know, people always say to me, now, you are so strong. You know, and I say, what do you mean that I am so strong? And I think what they really mean is that by being a member of AFSI, and by going into Judea, Samaria, the Golan, Eastern Jerusalem, the Negev, the Judean hills, the Jordan Valley, all the different places that we travel to, and Hebron, of course, and we just go in. You know, we go to all these places, and we meet the people, and we bond with them, and we go back again. And I think, you know, the ordinary person doesn't think that this is like a normal thing to do. And for us, it's very normal. And, you know, if that's what makes us strong, well, so be it. We're very proud. But since we are Americans for a safe Israel, we are not the Israelis. Maybe, God willing, someday all of us will make that aliyah that Jabotinsky spoke about and that he felt was so necessary in pre-war Europe. But since we are Americans for a safe Israel, we have to be involved, and we are involved with the things that are going on here in America, right? Ron mentioned the United Nations, the cesspool on the East River. Too bad it's such a beautiful, beautiful building, because and on such a gorgeous site, it would really make an ideal place for a wonderful condo, residential complex. I mean, can you imagine the AFSI offices in that spot, you know, overlooking the river? It would be just so gorgeous. So we are constantly applauding Danny Danon, Israel's ambassador to the UN, and Nikki Haley, who could imagine such a wonderful supporter. They are a dynamite duo overseeing what's in the best interests of America and Israel. And one perfect example, of course, is what's happening with UNRWA. You know, the United Nations Works Relief Association, suddenly we discovered after less than 1,000 Arabs left Israel at the insistence of their own leaders, left Israel in 1948 when the Arabs attacked Israel. Suddenly the numbers become 5.2 million, 5.2 million Arab refugees. And UNRWA is the special organization that has to take care of them. And who's paying the bill? America's paying the bill, along with the European nations. So fortunately, Nikki Haley and her colleagues are looking at this now, and hopefully there'll be some big changes. Now, the Iran deal, we protested against that. I was arrested. Yes, I'm a jailbird. I was arrested along with a few of our other AFSI Chazuk people. I'm looking for Berit. I don't see her, but she was with me. And we sat down at Kirsten Gillibrand's office, and we said, you know, this deal has to be torn. This is not a deal. This is one person pushing a promotion of his own. And the police who knew us, they were very friendly. They came over, they said, you have to get up now. You know, I said, well, okay, you know, because they knew that, you know, we were working with them. Vered would get up. The policeman came over to me and said, what are we going to do with her? She won't get up. I said, well, I'll speak to her. I'll explain to her the way it is. And so we got her into the paddy wagon, and we got, you know, it was what we call a friendly arrest. So we were released pretty quickly. But we are so pleased that John Bolton is the National Security Advisor. And he's always been against the Iran deal, and he's working closely with President Trump on this issue. And we're thrilled with Mike Pompeo when he was in Congress. When he was in Congress, we used to go on congressional missions. AFSI would round up people, and we took busloads to Congress. And Mike Pompeo was always right on the issues, always right. So now that he's Secretary of State, we're thrilled that he's there, and very pleased with the hard line he's taking on the North Korea denuclearization issue. And of course, we support Israel in this nation-state issue. I mean, it's so obvious. It's just so obvious, It's like I would have to say, I'm Helen Friedman, I'm standing here in front of you in a blue and white dress, and I'm talking to you tonight. I mean, that's how obvious it is. Yes, it's the national homeland. Yes, it's the Jewish homeland. And yes, the anthem, which we sang earlier. And yes, the Pledge of Allegiance and the Magen David. All of these are the symbols of Israel. And we support all of that, and we support that declaration that came out. Horribly, those of you who've been following the news, you know what happened in Sderot today, that they were hit with more terror, more rockets than they have in the past 5 years. We love Sderot. We love Sderot. We go there all the time in our missions. Alon Davidi, the mayor of Sderot, is a very personal, dear friend of ours. He always introduces me to people when he sees me. He says, Helen was my friend before I was the mayor. So it wasn't that, once he became mayor, I said, oh, okay, you're someone I want to know. I was his friend before, and he's so pleased about that. My heart is breaking that he is suffering so with his city, because he is so proud of Sderot and so eager to make it this very, very, very special place. And it's growing amazingly, but unfortunately, it's being bombarded by the rockets and the kites and the balloons and all of that. So hopefully the government will take care of that. The rising anti-Semitism in the United States is something that we have to protest against all the time. That women's march with Linda Sarsour and Tamika Mallory was just a total disgrace. And that kind of thing is seeping into the young people, because they are lured by the idea that they're marching for women's rights and they're marching for values that are very, very proper. But it ends up that these things are being co-opted by the Muslims and the Jew haters. And so we have to be very wary about that. Of course, moving the embassy to Jerusalem was something that we applauded tremendously. The AFSI group that was there, many of you were with us, we stood in front of what was the consulate in April when the group was there, before it became the embassy, and we took a wonderful group photo there. The fake news and this whole unending investigation into the Russian collusion is something that that you just wish that it would end. And I know that our wonderful Aaron Klein, who is here tonight to speak to us, and when I was checking with Aaron about him absolutely being able to make it tonight, he said, well, if, God forbid, there's a war in Israel, I have to go. So thank God right at this moment there is no war. Thank God for Israel. Thank God that so Aaron can be with us. And I first met Aaron, I think it was the first time, Aaron, in 2005. We were both in Gush Katif together, and that was just before the expulsion. And we were there because we couldn't believe, I was there, I couldn't believe the expulsion would take place, and we thought that just by being there, our presence, our energy, we could stop it, but we weren't successful. And then I think it was a year later that when we went back for the first year anniversary of the expulsion, that it was always around Tisha B'Av time. And together we marched around the walls of the old city in this march that the Women in Green always conduct. So I have a very warm spot in my heart for Aaron, who's been such a wonderful supporter of Israel, such a marvelous investigative reporter. All of you know that he is the host of the radio program The Answer, which is on Salem Radio 970 every Sunday night from 7 to 9 p.m. He's the Mideast bureau chief for Breitbart News and a weekly columnist for the Jewish Press, constantly on the edge, the cutting edge of breaking news. And Aaron, it's such a pleasure to have you here tonight.
First of all, I'm quickly trying to write a new book in the next few months. But kind of because there is no real news media, I don't actually get to have the time to sit down and write it, because every time I try to write, some huge story breaks that requires someone who's not a total fake reporter to investigate. But it happens to be, and Helen's mentioning Gush Katif, that on the chapter right now, finishing the chapter on Gaza. And I remember it, Helen, like it was yesterday. Showing up, in fact, actually, because Ariel Sharon announced the Gaza withdrawal, that's why I first, as a reporter, decided to go to the Middle East. And I lived originally in Jerusalem, 2005, but immediately got a place in Gush Katif. And I remember actually just the first night when I'm there, and I'm an American kid, just graduated from college, the concept of falling asleep and hearing a buzz above your house and knowing that that's a rocket that can smash right through your house at any moment didn't really set in until that first night, and I didn't really get too much sleep. But I remember back then, after my initial experience in Gush Katif, I would run back to my friends in Tel Aviv and warn them, if Israel evacuates Gaza, Tel Aviv is eventually going to be hit by rockets. And back then, the concept of Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or central Israel or really anywhere outside of Gush Katif of Gaza being hit by rockets was so foreign that people thought I was an alarmist, a little bit more on the pessimistic side of things. Actually, there weren't even rockets back then in Sderot. But I remember I was there throughout the entire expulsion of the Jews of Gush Katif, the entire time. Thank you. Yeah. I lived in a beautiful tree-lined community called Gan Tal as a reporter there. And then during the actual expulsion, moved to Neve Dekalim, which was the main city there, the capital of Gush Katif. When people would think of Gush Katif, of Gaza, of settlements, of the concept of Jews living in this coastal enclave next to Gaza City and Khan Yunis, you have this image in your head, I'm sure, of dilapidated homes falling apart. But actually, it was such a beautiful community, tree-lined, farming community, high-tech greenhouses. I remember going through the greenhouses, and then, of course, after the expulsion, American do-gooders paid about $13 million to save those greenhouses for the Palestinians, and I think it was only a few hours before everything was picked through, and in total poetic injustice, I guess, the metal from the greenhouses, of course, famously used, some of them reportedly, for Qassam rockets. In fact, actually, after the Gaza evacuation, because I was a reporter, I was allowed to stay there for a few hours after Neve Dekalim fell, after it was a total ghost town. And I strolled through the areas where I used to go to the cafe or the restaurant, totally dead. And then I think it was 2 days later that Hamas announced that they were using Neve Dekalim as a training base to stage what would obviously be the war against Israel that everybody should have known would happen. And today, we don't even hear about Gush Katif. We don't talk about it. It's not even part of our conversation. It's not in the lexicon. It's as if it didn't even happen. And actually, it's critical to pay attention to Gush Katif because it is the shining example for exactly why not, never, in fact, to evacuate territory, ever. I remember when Ariel Sharon was selling the Gaza evacuation as good for Israel's security. Can you imagine? In fact, I remember Sharon getting up and making speeches to the Israeli public and saying, well, if we evacuate the Gaza Strip and one missile or rocket flies out of here, remember he said the world would understand if we would have to go in and take care of that. I mean, was anybody around just a few months ago? I was on the border where you had the most obvious, morally clear, black and white conflict of, on the one side, Hamas, a terror organization, using civilians as human shields. Hamas, a terror organization, announcing that their aim, their goal, openly, was to storm into Israel's border and murder Jews. They said it. And then you can actually see the video, the photos of the peaceful protesters with guns, with Molotov cocktails, fire bombs. And then on the other hand, you had Israel that got out of Gaza in hopes of peace, in hopes of creating some sort of peaceful dynamic, simply defending against a march to destroy its borders. And yet, the entire news media, the fake news media, we saw how, I guess, Ariel Sharon's promise of the world understanding didn't come to fruition, and never will, actually. Israel needs to stop paying attention to what the rest of the world thinks and start defending itself. Now, another thing, if you remember, and again, nobody likes to talk about Gush Katif, but President Bush, at the time, this was another selling point for Ariel Sharon, he sent an official letter to Israel. It's on the White House website until today. This letter was supposed to define, in fact, enshrine American policy about future evacuations. That in exchange for Israel getting out of the Gaza Strip, we got this letter in Israel that in the future, Israel would not be expected to evacuate most of, that they would be able essentially to keep some parts of the West Bank, as it's called, Judea and Samaria. And then you had Barack Obama attempt to totally abrogate that letter, which was more than just a simple bunching of words on a piece of paper. It was a pledge. It was supposed to be an American promise. So even that kind of wasn't kept. And then I have to say, the American Jewish leadership, where were they on Gush Katif? Helen was there. Well, okay, that's another story. But, I mean, how could they? I mean, I guess you can't be more religious than the Pope, as they say, and the Israeli government was supporting it. But how can anybody in their right mind look at the evacuation of Gaza, just as if you go back, of course, to the Oslo Accords and to believe that Yasser Arafat, the godfather of modern-day terrorism, the guy who pioneered airplane hijackings, the guy who, don't forget, he called for directly the murder of 3 Americans, diplomats, in fact, in Khartoum in 1973, caught on tape, that we can turn him into a statesman. So all of these lessons really need to be kept in mind for where we are today. Now, normally, people have actually complained about my radio show because it's on at night, and they say that they can't fall asleep afterwards because I'm just telling the truth. I'm just saying it like it is. But actually, I have to say that for the first time in a long time, I actually have hope that things can be okay for Israel on all levels if we have Israeli leadership. Because here in America, we seem to have, thank God, American leadership. American leadership that is clearly standing with Israel from start to finish, including on Iran, which I'm sure we're going to get to. And there's a lot of fake news about alarmism that Donald Trump somehow is going to sell out Israel and Iran when the evidence is literally the exact opposite. But let's just take a look at the election of Donald Trump in 2016 and the presidency of Donald Trump today. What Trump so clearly represents is that he gets up there and says the emperor has no clothes. He says it not just like it is, but like we all recognize it to be. He's simply telling reality. He's saying fake news, and looking at the establishment, the political class, and telling it like it is. And I think it's high time for the Israeli government to do exactly the same. First of all, let's start with the two-state solution. It's a fiction. It doesn't exist. Its foundation is a bed of lies. So why continue to perpetuate it, especially now during the presidency of Donald Trump? I mean, just think about it. To believe in the two-state solution, first of all, you have to believe that there's a partner for peace. That is the foundation. Now, in 2018, and certainly in this room, I'm not going to waste my breath telling you why Mahmoud Abbas and Fatah, the entire Palestinian leadership that openly calls for the murder of Jews and destruction of Israel and has their entire media apparatus educate in violence and jihad and death, and Fatah's security forces are members of the Al-Aqsa brigades, why they're not peace partners. I mean, if you believe that Mahmoud Abbas truly believed that he's a partner for peace, I don't know, call 911 because you're about to have a psychotic break. There's no way to actually believe that, and you have to in order to go through with the so-called two-state solution. You know, another thing is the fake news term occupation. I'm so sick and tired of hearing about that. Occupation. First of all, there are legal arguments, and I have a whole chapter in the coming book, and they're out there, for why, at the very most, legally, maybe the United Nations can call it disputed territory. But we're talking here about Hebron, Shiloh, Eli, Beit El, as if there's no history there before 1967. Yet, even by the way, Gaza, most people, I think maybe in this room, would be surprised to know that Jews have a long historic connection to Gaza. It's in the Bible, actually. It's in the Torah. The Talmudic period, actually, some of it unfolded in Gaza. Abraham first entered through Gaza. And then you have Hebron, where you don't have to go back to the Bible. Just look to the period until 1928-29, to the Arab pogroms. Don't forget, Jews lived. In fact, Hebron, not Jerusalem, is the oldest continuous Jewish community in the world. And the only reason it stopped was because of the Arab murders of Jews. The old city, Jews lived there historically. So there is no occupation, and I think the Israeli government really needs to get up and, just like Donald Trump does, and not care about what the media says, not care about what the international community thinks, and tell these simple truths. Now there's the issue of refugees, quote unquote, refugees. Another transparent lie. Outright. I mean, do you know that every single refugee on the face of the earth, other than the Palestinians, are tended to by one UN agency on the one hand, and then you have this one agency that totally changes the definition of what a refugee actually is. The United Nations, the world, calls a refugee, of course, somebody who was forced to flee from their homes. The UN for Palestinians says forced to flee during this 2-year period. That's it. So they could have come 2 years before, and probably a lot of fake refugees got in. Also, no other refugee on the face of the earth can pass their refugee status on to children, to grandchildren. And then you have the demographics, the numbers, a probably total fake news story. Actually, just a few months ago, Lebanon, the United Nations in Lebanon, counted the so-called Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, where we were told there were 500,000. And even that census came back with 250,000, half. And I can get into the whole shenanigans where the Palestinians inflated birth rates, deflated death rates, counted eastern sections of Jerusalem twice. But we need to call fake news on the issue of refugees.
Okay, so that was a treat, and thank you so much, Ron.